Okay, so we're going to move on to a new section. I want to talk to you about, so we're moving through this Rome piece and the rise of Rome, and they move it through the Republic into the Roman Empire, and the beginnings of it with Octavian, otherwise known as Caesar Augustus, and then you move into the second, third, and fourth emperors. And we go through a variety of emperors, and there's some amazing ones. There's a period of 5 really good emperors, actually. We had a bunch of really bad ones. Nero, Caligula, sort of very self-centered, think it was about them. But luckily for the empire, there's a period where there's 5 good ones. Emperor Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius is the last one. There are a couple other guys as well. But what I want to talk to you mainly about is something it's sort of insignificant at the time, but ultimately, transforms the empire itself. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this notion of what a Christian is. A lot of people they've heard of the term Christian. They know some Christian stuff, but they don't necessarily know where it comes from. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about that. So obviously, when you're talking about Christian, the beginnings of Christianity, you're talking about the origins of this guy named Joshua ben Yosef. Joshua, son of Joseph. Because he didn't have last names, so his name was Joshua. And the Greek version of Joshua is Jesus. So that's where this story's about. But before Jesus, I want to talk to you about sort of the evolution of that, because Christianity comes directly out of Judaism and being Jewish. So we have to start that story there. You can't tell that story without it. So this is the story from the Old Testament. The Bible is made up of 2 pieces, Old Testament and New Testament. This is the story of the Old Testament, and it's the story of the Jews. Right? It's all the Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and all that stuff. So we need to talk a little bit about that. And that kind of stuff really, like the beginnings of this stuff begins with this group known as the Hebrews. I don't know if you can see it or not, but right over here on a sort of short timeline, small timeline, you have the Hebrews. They sort of started around 5,000 years ago. And there's a whole story that goes with it, but essentially, it goes to about the year 600 BCE, so 2,600 years ago, kind of like the beginnings of like Greece, sort of classical Greece. It was still in the archaic period, but you see this transformation of these Hebrew people into Jews because they come from Judea. That's the name of the place that they come from. And this whole story is how that happens in something called the Babylonian captivity, and I think we'll get to that. I hope we'll get to that. But so that's the Hebrews, and then the Jews, and then the Jews, as we know, the Jewish people, they continue on to modern day, and they are still around. They're all over the world. There's a Jewish homeland called Israel, and there's Jewish people that live all over the world, the diaspora. They live in New York City, Montreal. They live in North Bay. The Jewish people live everywhere, right? So that's the story of the Hebrews to the Jews to the modern day. But you'll notice that there's no Christian piece on that. So we need to talk a little bit about that. And what we need to sort of to start that is this notion of being a Jew involves one sort of major trait, and that trait is waiting. The notion of being Jewish brings along with it this idea of waiting. Well, waiting for what would obviously be the next question, and that what they're waiting for is for somebody to save them. Because God, or Yahweh, their version of God, that name, is the version of Yahweh is this discussion about Yahweh has promised to save the Jews. Now, what does that save them from? Well, there's a lot of things that the Jews need saving from. In this particular time period that we're going to get into, we're talking about the savings of the Romans, by the Romans, and we're also getting to see them saved by King Herod, right? So we have there's a lot of things to be saved from. So that's what we need to talk about. So they're waiting for the Savior to come, the Messiah. Right? Messiah or the Savior. Right? So, and even in modern day, the Jews are still waiting for the Messiah to come. So even down here in modern day, the Jews are still waiting for the Messiah. Right? So that's kind of like, that doesn't tell you a lot about what Jews believe, but that's kind of like the central piece to this story. All right, so around 2,000 years ago, so like here, 2,000 years ago, a small group of people believed that the Messiah did come. And this Messiah was Joshua ben Yosef, this sort of carpenter, small young carpenter figure. And to make this to take this story very, very quickly, this small group of people believed in Jesus, in Joshua, and they started to follow him. This group of followers were Jewish. And they just believed that the Messiah had come. So we see this sort of breakaway from the Jews into this brand new sort of ideology that followed the ideas of Jesus. This breakaway is known as Christianity. All right? So this doesn't tell us what Christians believe. This doesn't tell us what Jews believe. This just tells us the timeline about where the Christians come from, their origins, and then the split in Judaism. That split is also, one of those splits is called Christianity. Right? So you have this various sort of connections that way. Basically then, when you're talking about the Bible then, the Christian notion of the Bible is divided in two pieces. From this side on is the New Testament, and on this side backwards is the Old Testament. All right, and that's just, so the New Testament is the story of Jesus and the beliefs of Jesus and all that stuff. So that's the sort of origin story of the Jews and the notion of the Messiah. And then the Messiah does come for a small group of Jews. Most Jews didn't then believe, nor do they believe today, that the Messiah came. Right? There's just a small group, like 12 of them, if you know what that number's about. Right? So that's the small group, and then from there it grows, and then the Roman Empire fits into that story as well. So it's all kind of around that same time period, because over this line is when you see the Roman Empire develop. Right? Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Tiberius, all these guys, and then you're moving into the whole story of the Roman Empire, and ultimately the fall of the Roman Empire. All right?